If you're anything like me, you know the importance of eating healthy, but you don't always have the time or willpower to cook with all the colors of the rainbow. Organifi's superfood blends make it easy and enjoyable to add more variety and nutrition to your day. I am loving Organifi Pure as part of my daily routine to help clear morning brain fog, improve digestion, and support mental clarity. It includes 9 superfoods and compounds and is rich in beta-glucans and antioxidants. It's clinically proven to promote healthy BDNF levels derived from coffee berry. It also contains ginger root, lemon, monk fruit, digestive enzymes, and coconut water to make a delicious brain-boosting lemonade snack. Organifi has a ton of delicious organic blends you can try. Just add to water, stir with a spoon, and enjoy anytime for more energy, nutrition, hormone balance, and peace of mind. And the best part is that you can experience Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank with a price that works out to less than $3 a day. Head over to www.organifi.com/bestofyou and use code bestofyou for 20% off your entire order. That's www.organifi.com/bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I am so thrilled you're here today. This is a really exciting week for many of us therapists, especially those of us who work in the field of internal family systems, or IFS, which is the topic of my first book with Kimberly Miller, Boundaries for Your Soul. I know many of you are familiar with the book. Many of you are familiar with IFS. But the reason so many of us are excited this week is because of the brand new Pixar movie that just came out. It's Inside Out 2. The movie is a follow-up to Pixar's movie Inside Out that came out several years ago, which Kim and I actually featured in Boundaries for Your Soul to help illustrate this model of therapy. It is such a valuable, helpful way to visualize and conceptualize what is happening inside the minds of every single one of us. And this movie is a fantastic tool, not only for your kids to learn about their internal landscapes, but also for us adults. Go with the whole family. Take your spouse on a date. Take your kids. Take your friends, because there is real wisdom in how the movie depicts these different parts of our psyches. And so in today's episode, I've invited on a dear friend of mine, a clinician and an author and a leader in the IFS space to talk about her own internal landscape. Before we dive into that interview, I want to give those of you who are new to the podcast or new to this material a really brief overview of what we mean by this internal family system that we all have. But if you want to know more, please go back and listen to episodes 39 and 40, where I take a deep dive into the basics of the IFS model of therapy, as well as the 5 steps to healing a part of your soul. You can also check out Boundaries for Your Soul, as well as today's guest's book called Altogether You. These are all fantastic resources for you to learn more about this internal family system that we all have and that is depicted in these Inside Out movies. Internal family systems, IFS, is a model of therapy that posits that you are comprised of a family of parts. When you think about a system is a group of individual entities that need to work together. So you might think of an organization or a company as a system. There are lots of individuals that make up that system, and each individual plays an important part toward the greater good of the whole. And a family is another example of a system. It's a group of interdependent individuals who work together to form something bigger than the individuals themselves. Systems work is really hard, and you'll often hear me talking about a system using the metaphor of a band. If you think about a band, it's comprised of so many individual parts. There's the flutes, there's the clarinets, there's the drums, there's the saxophones, there's the violins. And if any one of those parts gets out of balance, it creates a real clash, a real dissonance. The noise of the whole doesn't sound very good. But when each of those individual parts plays their role well and in partnership with the other parts, when all those parts work together, each playing their individual part well, but in light of the needs of the whole group, the band can create a beautiful melody instead of a clashing cacophony of discordant notes. And this is what we want to do within our own external families, right? We want each individual member to be able to play their role well in the family, to feel valued, to feel important, to feel honored. And also, we want each individual member to have a sense of the good of the whole. If any one individual takes over and doesn't care about the rest of the family members, that's not healthy. But at the same time, if the family doesn't create room and space and opportunity for each individual member to shine, that's also not healthy. The goal of a healthy system is that wholeness, is that harmony where each individual is honored and also so is the good of the whole. This is hard work, the work of creating a healthy system. If you think about a church is also a system. It's a group comprised of individuals all working together for the greater good of the whole. We don't often see healthy systems, especially in our culture. We tend to either magnify the individual to the exclusion of the larger system or group, or we magnify the group or the system to the deficit of the individual. And neither of those is healthy. All right, so with that in mind, I want you to think about the fact that there is a family of parts inside of you. You parent your own internal family. There are different emotions that you experience, each one having a valuable role. Each one of you parents an internal family that includes parts of you that experience anger, parts of you that experience sadness, parts of you that experience anxiety. And it goes on and on and on. And if you just think about any challenge that you face, you'll notice inside of yourself almost always some competing or conflicting emotions. You might feel frustrated with your kids, and without skipping a beat, simultaneously, you feel guilty about feeling that way, right? So right there, you've got a part of you that's frustrated and a part of you that doesn't think you should feel that way. And those two parts of you are in conflict. You might have a part of you that is really anxious and another part of you that's mad that you're anxious. As we discussed last week with Dr. Len Lance, I think of depression as a cluster of parts of the soul that have taken on the heavy weight of depression. And those parts of you are not all of who you are, but they've begun to dominate your internal landscape. And just as you parent children in your extended family, it is each of our responsibility to begin to parent these parts of our own selves. I would argue that this idea that there are many parts of you is one of the most foundational and helpful components to healing that there is. A huge part of healing is to recognize that any one emotion that you experience at any given moment is not the sum total of who you are. It's a part of you. It has value. It has important information for you to know, but it is not all of who you are. Anxiety is not all of who you are. Anger is not all of who you are. Sadness is not all of who you are. Even joy, as you'll see in the Inside Out movies, is not all of who you are. It's a part of who we are. And the most beautiful melody of our lives comes when each of these parts is working together harmoniously with the other. When I can, in any given moment, say, you know what? A part of me is angry with you right now, and I also deeply cherish you. Both of those things are true simultaneously. A part of me is frustrated with you, and another part of me is scared that if I speak up about that, I'm going to lose you. And as you begin to honor the different parts of yourself, you see much more clearly how to begin to have not only healthy relationships with each of the emotions that God has placed inside of you, but also with the other people in your life. And these two Pixar movies demonstrate that reality so powerfully. I'm not going to spoil the movies for you, but the main character, Riley, is going through some challenges. And we get to know Riley as she's going through life, but we also get to know each of these emotions, these characters inside her own mind. She deals with Joy, and Joy doesn't like the part of her that feels sad, and fear is often there with its teeth chattering on the sidelines of her life. Anger steps in from time to time to help her out in ways that are sometimes helpful and sometimes not helpful. And we also see the different emotions that her parents are experiencing as they try to parent Riley. It's such a helpful springboard for really healthy, honest conversations about emotions. And in light of the buzz around this new movie, Inside Out 2, I wanted to invite a couple of my friends onto the podcast who are seasoned IFS clinicians who bring a faith component to their work in IFS and who have created resources that relate to this work of parenting the different parts of your soul. My guest today is a dear friend. She's an incredible woman, a seasoned IFS clinician, the author of 2 books on IFS, and just an all-around beautiful human being. Jenna Riemersma is a #1 bestselling IFS author, speaker, and clinical director. She is a certified level 3 IFS therapist. She's also an EMDR trained trauma therapist and the developer of the Move Toward Shorthand of the IFS model of therapy. Jenna is the author of the best-selling IFS books Altogether You, Experiencing Personal and Spiritual Transformation Through Internal Family System Therapy, and her second book, Altogether Us, Integrating the IFS Model with Key Modalities, Communities, and Trends. And like Boundaries for Your Soul, Jenna's book, Altogether You, is a faith-based integration of the IFS model with a Christian faith perspective. She shared with me for the first time her experience of writing Altogether You just as Boundaries for Your Soul was coming out and what that was like for her. She is just so real and so candid and so beautiful. I love this woman. I love the work that she is putting into the world. Everything Jenna does is so helpful and so grounded in the fact that she has done the work herself, as you'll hear on today's episode. Please enjoy my conversation with Jenna Riemersma. Jenna, I'm so thrilled to have your expertise, everything about you. I just have so much respect for, and I'm so excited to have you here today. This is the week that the new Inside Out movie came out. And in honor of that, I was so excited to have a few conversations with some of the IFS therapists and clinicians who I respect the most in the world about this inner landscape that we all have. Your first book, Altogether You, is about IFS. It's a faith-based approach to it. It's different from Boundaries for Your Soul, but there's a similar theme of taking IFS and integrating it, right, with a faith perspective. And I highly recommend it to all my listeners. But Jenny, you describe your experience growing up as an only child in a military family, moving around a lot. I have listeners who write to me about that experience. It's more common than one would think, which understandably creates challenge in a child's inner world. And you describe kind of masking through perfectionism in performing. I would love to go back in time to that younger you, thinking of Riley in the Inside Out movie in those preteen years. What were some of the characters or parts that developed inside your inner landscape to cope with some of those challenges?
Well, I feel like I am Riley because watching the Inside Out movie, I'm resonating with absolutely everything, and I cannot recommend it highly enough to your listeners. It's just an amazing sort of a representation of kind of an IFS approach to understanding our inner worlds. And Riley is a young pre-adolescent who's going through a really challenging move from this idyllic place where she's lived into a completely different environment, and just being able to come to terms with acknowledging all the different parts of herself and not just joy. Like, it's been a really interesting thing to watch in her journey and Inside Out. Joy went from being what we call in internal family systems an unburdened part of just the pure essence of just joyfulness, to a burdened part where joy had to start being in control of everything. And there's this amazing scene where joy draws a circle around sadness and says, "Sadness, I've got the perfect plan for you on the first day of school. You stay in this circle and don't move." And it's a perfect example of exiling and spiritual bypassing. And I had that going on in my inner world in spades as an only child who moved every year or two my entire life. What I knew would be well received in my world was doing things perfectly, pleasing people, and trying to exile all the parts of me that were feeling and doing things that weren't very shiny. Just like joy tried to exile sadness. And that looked really good on the surface, but it was coming apart at the seams inside, which very similar to kind of what Riley experienced in the movie.
How did you, as a younger woman, whether as a teenager or even in young adulthood, how did you experience that dissonance almost, the fractured of what you were able to do on the outside, which I'm assuming other people around you thought you were great, you had it all together, you were thriving, whereas internally you were feeling like you were coming apart at the seams. How did you experience that back then?
I did not have an understanding of what was happening or words for it. What landed in my inner system was this deep-seated belief, which I now know to be a burden of a part of mine, an exile, that just believed, I'm broken, I'm not good enough, something's wrong with me. And if anybody ever saw through this outside facade and saw who I really was and how I really felt, how much anxiety and shame I really was carrying, they wouldn't love me. They would reject me. And my internal system became heavily burdened with those beliefs. And then my protective inner system became very, very involved and invested in making sure nobody ever saw that. All outside of my conscious knowing. I just knew that I wasn't comfortable in my own skin, but I didn't understand why or what was happening or how to fix it.
You're saying something so wise, and I want the listener to hear this. I often say the stronger the armor, the more tender the heart. And the armor in your case, Jenna, this perfectionism, pleasing, performing, I'm assuming and imagining, similar to my own experience, was socially acceptable armor. It wasn't the kind of armor that was, going out and doing drugs or acting out or being delinquent in some way. It was the kind of armor that folks probably respected in many ways. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. It made a lot of sense for the parts of me took on this high performing, achieving, people pleasing kind of armor because it was very well received in my environment, in my home. And it was one of the only ways that I could feel positive feedback. And I just kept trying to jump higher and try harder and do all the things. And finally, graduated from Harvard with a master's degree, and it still felt empty. And I realized something is really wrong here. I can't jump any higher. I can't do any more. And this is not working. It is not working. I am still miserable inside.
You kind of just answered my next question. When did you begin to realize that this wasn't working? So it sounds like it was all the way after your master's degree, that just the misery inside of you just would not go away, no matter how much you achieved.
Yes. And from an IFS perspective, we know that that is true because when we have exiles, the vulnerable parts of us that carry these core beliefs are from our trauma. And mine were, I'm all alone. Something's wrong with me. If you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. Those don't go away with time. Like one of my pet peeve phrases is children are so resilient. No, they're not. Children have strong protectors that learn how to cover up their exiles and function in a way that looks, very functional in a variety of ways. I certainly did, but my exiles were not healed. And in fact, with every experience I had, they became more and more burdened because somehow it still wasn't good enough. And until I stopped striving outward and began to turn my focus inward to connect with my own parts and my own system and welcome all the different parts of me, no matter what they were feeling or doing, which is the opposite of what I'd spent my whole life doing, which was moving against them. I started moving toward them with curiosity and compassion. That's when everything shifted.
Do you struggle with sleeping through the night, or do you experience low energy during the day? If so, it's possible that, like 75% of American adults, you might be deficient in magnesium. Magnesium is a mineral that's essential to hundreds of functions in the body, and a deficiency in magnesium is a root cause of a whole host of modern ailments, from anxiety and depression to insomnia and stress. Enter Mellow Magnesium. It's a powerful daily super blend that contains the three most bioavailable and nutrient-dense forms of magnesium on Earth. Ned spent over 3 years developing their best-selling Mellow Magnesium Super Blend, a quest that took them from the hallowed halls of MIT to the rocky fjords of Iceland to the frigid waters of the Irish Sea. These guys literally went to the ends of the earth to create the best magnesium supplement on the planet. Become the best version of yourself and get 15% off Ned products with code BESTOFYOU. Go to helloned.com/bestofyou or enter code BESTOFYOU at checkout. That's HELLONED.com/bestofyou to get 15% off. Americans spend an average of 90% of their time indoors and take about 20,000 breaths a day. The indoor air that we breathe is 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air, and in some cases up to 100 times more polluted, according to the EPA. And did you know that air pollution is responsible for nearly 7 million premature deaths globally? So what's the solution? Introducing an air purifier that captured the attention of established media outlets such as CNN, Money, ABC, and more. Air Doctor filters out 99% of dangerous contaminants so your lungs don't have to. This includes pollutants such as allergens, pollen, pet dander, dust mites, mold spores, and even bacteria and viruses that make you sick. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day breathe-easy money-back guarantee. So if you don't love it, just send it back for a refund minus shipping. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code BESTOFYOU. You'll receive up to $300 off air purifiers. Exclusive to podcast customers, you will also receive a free 3-year warranty on any unit, which is an additional $84 value. Lock this special offer by going to airdoctorpro.com, that's AIRDOCTORPRO.com, and use promo code BESTOFYOU. So, Jenna, take us back to, you've got your master's degree, you've kind of achieved everything externally that people would assume would make you feel healthy or successful or happy. Inside, you realize it's the opposite. You're not. How did you reach out for help? And what did you find, whether from a therapist, from a faith community, from friends? And the reason I ask this question without an agenda, meaning sometimes you reach out for help and it's not helpful. Sometimes we have to wrestle for good help, the kind of help we actually need. And so I'm curious, in that moment where you realized things aren't working, I need to change. Sometimes those moments, I know in my own experience, when I've had those key inflection points where it's like, man, for me, it was anxiety. Just anxiety started to rush up to the surface. It was very similar. I was almost to the end of a doctoral program. I'd literally never taken an incomplete in a class. And suddenly I'm having panic attacks, and not able to attend class, and you start scrambling for support, and you find out really quickly where help actually comes from and where it does not. What was that like for you in those moments when you started to reach out for support? Because I'm assuming at this point you didn't yet know about IFS.
I did not. In fact, I was not a therapist at this point in my journey. My first degree, what I went to Harvard for, was public policy. I was working on Capitol Hill and creating legislation, and I was in a completely different world, and I knew nothing about therapy or clinical work. I had never even been in counseling, and I didn't know anything about the clinical world. But what really brought it to the surface for me was having this big career on Capitol Hill that was moving very quickly in an advancing direction, having a master's degree from Harvard, being married to my dream husband, and having, 2 kids and the white picket fence and the golden retriever. And it just was very shiny, shiny, shiny on the outside. And then some deep, dark challenges started to emerge in our marriage that they blindsided me. I had no way of making sense of what was happening, and I was absolutely devastated. All of my coping strategies at this point were worthless because the trying to pretend everything was okay, I couldn't. There was no way to pretend everything was okay. And it was a mixed bag of responses. I had the good fortune of being a part of a wonderful faith community with some really incredible friends who I didn't realize, but I had never really let close to me. They were friends. I was there for them and their struggles, but I don't know that I really knew that I could share my struggles. I didn't know that was allowed. It was not part of my protective armor that I could be vulnerable, I could share. And I had some dear friends who I was able to open up to and who were able to see all parts of me, all the pain, all the mess, and really embrace me and allow me to be in the mess without any agenda. And it was incredibly healing and transformational. And I had experiences of reaching out to perhaps the more formal faith community and receiving, unfortunately, some well-intentioned but very damaging, very hurtful platitudes. I needed to pray more, or if I would just be a more godly woman or recite this scripture, then I wouldn't feel this anxiety, or I need to give it to God, or a whole variety of what I now know to be spiritual bypass, which was more about creating comfort for the person who was sitting across from me than really tending to my wounds. And that experience really reinforced my protective system that said, aha, it's not actually safe to let people see when you're hurting and wounded and vulnerable. And that whole experience led me to therapy, which was thankfully good therapy and deeply transformational and healing. And kind of in the middle of the darkest moments of that whole experience, I had a very clear encounter with God who said, I am calling you to do this work. And I said, oh, no, you're not. This is awful. The last thing in the world I want to do is spend any more time in this world of trauma and grief and loss. And God said, oh, yes, I am. And I fought that for a year or two as I was going through my own healing, beginning healing journey, which I've now been on for the better part of 30 years. And gratefully, God was right and I was wrong, and my resistance was overcome. And I went and got a whole different master's degree and started working in the field. And then I encountered IFS, and that encountering IFS was the change point for me. That was really where the healing began, because I had never before heard the message that all parts of me could be welcome. I had always verbally and non-verbally gotten the very clear message that only the shiny parts of me were welcome and all the rest of the parts of me needed to stay locked in the basement. And IFS said, oh, no, 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 no. Just the same way that Jesus brings his loving kindness and healing outside of us, he wants to bring it to all parts of you. And I said, I don't even know. How do we do this? And I began to open into that process, and it was absolutely life-changing to me, spiritually, emotionally, in every possible way. And that led me to, I am a clinical consultant now and writing books and teaching and speaking and helping other people experience that in the way that it really transformed my life. And I'm just very, very grateful that that was my path.
I love that, Jenna. I love that the layers of healing that you describe. And I think it's so important for the listener to hear. There are layers. Initially, you had just friends who loved you and who honored. It wasn't deep trauma informed work at the beginning, but when you cracked open a little bit, there were some friends who honored you and loved you that brought a little healing into those exiled parts before you even knew, what they were. And then you said something I'd love to double click on. You said, I thankfully got in with a good therapist. You've now been a therapist for decades. You have a huge center in Atlanta. You are training so many therapists. You're deep in it. Back then, you knew nothing about it. I'm curious on behalf of the listener, how do we know when we're with a good therapist, with someone who's really going to help us?
Yeah, that's such a rich question. I was really blessed. The first person I landed with that someone recommended to me was the right person for me at that stage. And I knew because all parts of me were welcome in the room. And when you're with someone like that, I now know that that person had a lot of self energy on board, or what I would call the image of God inside of them, what IFS calls self. And when that is present in the room, no parts of you have to mask and pretend and defend. You can just simply be present with all the different parts of you with no judgment and no shame. And that was critical for me. And that was so powerful in my healing. Obviously, training and experience matter. Presence, I would almost say, matters equally as much. And the issue of faith or not faith is a really significant one that comes up a lot when people are coming to me looking for referrals or different things. And there seems to be this sort of polarization in the Christian community that we don't hesitate if we're diagnosed with cancer to immediately go to the best cancer specialist, wherever they are, whoever they are, and not really discern if we're going to work with them in our chemotherapy and surgery because of their faith orientation. There seems to be a divergence between our physical healing and our emotional healing. And many people feel that the Christian component is the most significant and the clinical is second best. But we don't feel that way about our dentist or our doctor or any other healing entity. And so a piece of wisdom that I encourage people is that a really skillful clinician will honor and integrate your faith perspective. And I would argue my perspective is that their clinical skill is more important than a specific faith orientation, or if they're Methodist or Presbyterian or Catholic or whatever they might happen to be. And to really be willing, in the same way that you would if you had a cancer diagnosis, to look for and screen for the person who is the most clinically qualified. And if they happen to be a person of faith, that's bonus, but rather than kind of the other way around. And I find that that has been a useful tool for me in discerning kind of helpful and less helpful counseling.
I love that, Jenna. I couldn't agree more with you. I think you said that so well. And I love what you're saying about being qualified for this specific thing. If you're dealing with deep trauma that you've never worked with, you want to be with someone who has worked with a lot of trauma, I love how you said expertise and experience. If you're dealing with extreme anxiety, if you're dealing with a marriage fracture, you want to work with someone trained specifically in that specific area of need and who has experience and expertise. I really love that. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of that background. Our dogs love Sundays. I'm not kidding. One of our dogs was the slowest eater on earth for the first several years of her life. It was painful how long it would take her to eat. The minute we introduced her to Sundays, she just laps it up. She loves it. Sundays is healthy dog food that's easy to store and serve. Most foods are one or the other, but Sundays is both. It's fresh dog food made from a short list of human-grade ingredients that contains 90% meat, 10% superfoods, and 0% synthetic nutrients. But unlike other fresh dog food, it doesn't require refrigeration or preparation. It's air-dried, so you simply pour and serve. It's so easy. Get 40% off your first order of Sundays. Go to sundaysfordogs.com/bestofyou or use code bestofyou at checkout. I want to ask you a little bit about Altogether You. You ended up becoming a therapist. You became trained in IFS. We have similar trajectories in some ways. I happened upon IFS very late in my own training in some ways, or not late, but certainly not at the beginning of it. And then it changed everything for me. And I think both of us in parallel were kind of absorbing IFS and then trying to figure out how does this assimilate with our faith background because it has a very spiritual component. What led you to write Altogether You? And I love how you refer to that self, that place inside as the imago Dei. We come down, and I think both are valid. I see both. We come down in it as the spirit-led self, the place where the Holy Spirit lives, where the Spirit of God comes to live. I think they're theologically very similar. The idea is there's a place inside of us that is that place, that sanctuary for the living God. Tell me a little bit more about that process of writing Altogether You.
There's a part of me that wants to give kind of a surface level pat answer. And there's another part of me that's sort of hilarious. That's like, tell the real story. So I'm sort of inclined to tell the real story because I don't think I've ever shared this with you in our years of friendship, but you're actually integrally involved in this story. And I don't think you know this. So I encountered IFS. It changed my life. And again, it was the second time I've had that kind of an encounter with God where God said, write this book. And I said, are you crazy? I am not an English major. I have never written a book. I have no idea how to write a book. I don't know anything about publishing. What do you mean write a book? So I argued with God. And as always happens, God won. And so I sat down and said, okay, I will write this book. And I wrote the book. I felt like when I was able to get into a flow state, just that deep sense of connection with the Holy Spirit, it just sort of came through me. I'm guessing you resonate with that in the writing process. It just sort of came through me and onto the page. And I said, okay, God, I wrote the book. Now what? And he said, well, go publish the book. And I said, I don't know how to publish a book. Are you kidding me? What in the world? And so anyway, I put it out in the world and immediately got multiple publishers were interested, which I was shocked about, and went under contract pretty quickly with a very large publisher and had been under contract for a year, not having any awareness of you, not knowing that you were working on a similar book. And a year into the process, the publisher out of nowhere pulled the contract. And about a day later, your book came out. And I said to God, are you kidding me? Why? Why did you tell me to write this book? Somebody else was already doing it, and now I don't even have a contract. And it was one of those crises of faith. And I went back to the drawing board and just sat in silence and said, I'm going to sit here, God, until I hear your direction for the next step. And I sat and I sat and I sat in silence. And long story short, God led me to a whole different direction of publishing. And now I've published multiple books and I'm working on my next book. And it was an incredible process, but it was really a gift to me to see your book came out. And I thought, well, I'm worthless. I have nothing to contribute. This has already been done. There's no reason that all of this is a waste. And the sweetness of God kind of going before us, and your book has met this beautiful need in the world and been incredibly well received and is an incredible book that I recommend highly. And my book has done incredibly well and reached a lot of places and been translated into many different languages and all the things. And it was very healing to my system that really believed in black and white thinking, that there's only one best and everything else is worthless. And to realize, no, we each bring our giftings and our talents and our perspective to the world, and it all matters and it all can be used in the service of God in different ways, and it's mutually compatible. And here we are, friends, publishing books kind of on the same path. And it's really been quite a lovely journey. Of that piece of it was really healing for my inner system of, hey, my voice could still bring something that matters, even if someone else has a voice. And that's not a message that my inner system and my exiles received when I was growing up. And so it's really been a sweet and a healing journey for me. And that's the first time I've shared that story with you.
I love that. I had no idea the timing was so parallel. And with the same light bulb, because that was very similar with Kim and me, we were thinking we've got to write about this from a faith perspective. And the way that God works in our hearts that can seem so mysterious to us. And there are things about your book. I mean, I would say to the listener, read both. I always tell people that they're very similar, but very different. It's that beauty of the diversity of the human experience. And you and I've talked about this in other ways where there are ways that your voice brings insight and wisdom and healing to the page. Just as a clinician, there are different ways each of us is going to approach something that are really valuable and kind of fill out the whole picture. And there's so many other people out there doing it too. We're all bringing a little bit of the light to this huge, complicated thing of trying to understand the human psyche in relationship to God. And I love that you shared that, Jenna, because it also ministers to me because I have those feelings all the time. Why do I need to keep using my voice? And so to hear you say that, I'm kind of shocked by that because I see you as such a formidable, courageous leader in the IFS community. So I would have had no idea that that was your experience.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I mentioned that not so much about my experience, but for listeners who may be listening and wondering, does what I have to bring to the world matter? Does my voice matter? Do my unique giftings matter? Yes, they do. And in fact, oddly enough, Dick Schwartz developed IFS out of his greatest professional failure. It emerged from an utter failure of the way that he was approaching therapy and out of his ability to be present to that with curiosity and compassion and really lean into his uniquenesses. IFS emerged, which is incredible. So just to any listeners who may be kind of navigating those types of life experiences and questionings and self-doubt, what you have to say and who you are and your giftings in the world absolutely matter.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I feel really honored that you would share on behalf of the real story there. That means a lot. I would love, Jenna, before we wind down here, I would love to ask you, because you are a mom, I know your kids are now out of the house, you're essentially empty nest, but you do a lot of writing, you run a clinical practice. What practices help you stay in tune with these young parts of us that are still with us, right? That we think about Riley, like throughout life, we're still trying to lead these parts of us. What practices help you do that?
Yeah, it's really a daily practice for me. And I find for me and the way my system is wired, it works best if I start my day with prayer and meditation and a turning inward to acknowledge all the different parts of me that are present. I will do guided meditations. I have many of them free on Insight Timers, and many other people do, but several other IFS practitioners have guided IFS meditations on Insight Timer, which is a free app. So I often will use that. I also use parts mapping, which is really helpful for me if I've got some parts at war over a particular decision or some parts that are struggling. I use parts mapping as a wonderful tool to connect with my system. And I'm always in my own IFS therapy. That feels really important to me. I cannot lead people where I am not going myself. And I do session swaps with my dear friend, Tammy Sollenberger.
I love it. She's going to be on the podcast.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, we swap sessions every couple of weeks and have for a long time. And just different ways of continuing to do my own work and bring really the divine love to all the different parts of my own inner system. Because if I am not doing that, then I can't be trying to lead other people and help other people do that. So it feels really like a double gift to me. It's kind of an ethical imperative, and it's such a gift to my system to continue to be in that journey. So
I love that.
Yeah, that's my practice.
We're always still in process, even as we're leading others. what would you want the younger version of you to know, that young, achieving, high-performing girl who's, headed out to conquer the world? What would you want her to know that you know now?
I would want her to know that all parts of you are welcome and all parts of you are good. Even parts of you that have gotten stuck, carrying burdens of painful feelings and behaviors and beliefs because of life experiences. I would love for her to know. I would love for every listener to know all parts of you are welcome and all parts of you truly are good.
Thank you for that. I love that. Tell us how we can connect with you, your books, your work. How can people find you?
Sure. Well, my books are available wherever books are sold. Amazon is a great spot to find Altogether You. And my second book is called Altogether Us. It's a pretty comprehensive IFS integration book. So if you're curious about this IFS model and how it integrates with parenting and sexuality and communication and all the many different things, that book is available at Amazon as well. My website is movetoward.com. because my shorthand of the IFS model that I've created, I've called it Move Toward, because I think that's the spirit of the model, to move toward all parts of ourselves with curiosity and compassion. So people are welcome to connect with me there at movetoward.com.
I love that. You've got so many great resources on your website, links to IFS therapists, Christian IFS therapists, resources, all sorts of things. So please go check out Jenna's work. Jenna, one last question that I try to ask all my guests. What's bringing out the best of you right now?
You are.
Oh.
Wonderful friends who understand that all parts are welcome and who are present with non-judgment and with love and curiosity and compassion, just like you are with me right now. So I would say in this moment, you bring out the best in me, and I'm so grateful for you and your beautiful heart and your beautiful work.
Well, I am so grateful for you, Jenna. In so many ways, I could share some return stories with you. And toward that end, we'll have you back on the podcast because there's just a wealth of wisdom here. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode, and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.